Good morning, YouTube, and happy Sunday. I usually refer to Sundays as soulful Sundays, and I do my best on each Sunday to try to do something that recharges my soul. And today it involved setting up some new audio equipment, unsuccessfully, hence the microphone in my hand. But I'm doing my best to improve this channel one day at a time, and thanks for hanging in there with me. Today I wanted to talk about something that was sparked by a conversation I had last week with my mother. And I have a great relationship with my mom, and we talk pretty frequently, almost every single day. And I was FaceTiming with her, and she stopped to comment on my shirt because I asked her if she liked it, and it's one of my recent products that I've designed and have put together. And her comment wasn't exactly positive. She liked the idea of the shirt, but she was really concerned with the verbiage and the word choice that I used, specifically with the word badass. And we talked about that for a little while, about the power of a word. And I said, Mom, there's something wrong, I think, with a lot of churches these days, or places of worship. I said that the language they use is very, very disconnected with the language that we hear outside of the walls of the building or establishment or congregation, if you will. And just for full context here, my background comes from a Christian religion or the Christian faith, but I've explored many different types of religious perspectives ever since I really hit my 20s, and so I definitely broadened my approach. But today I wanted to talk about the power of a word, and in this case, the word badass. And I wrote a blog a while ago called Jesus, the Original Badass. And I'm a big fan of Jesus. Not really a huge fan of Christianity. In fact, I think that the Christian values that are polluting our country these days are actually causing a lot more pain than help, and they have absolutely nothing to do with the message that Jesus talked about when he walked the earth. Now, Jesus was in fact a person, that's relatively undisputable, but how you relate to him is completely personal to you. But in the context of today, I'm going to use an example where Jesus did something different. He did something that was pretty badass. In fact, I think that if any of us had seen what he did that day, we'd say, man, that's a badass guy. And I think one of the problems that we have with Jesus is that we often paint him in this gentle Jesus, meek and mild type of picture. And many times the people that I talk to now have a very jaded picture of Jesus, and they really don't know who the person was or why you would want to connect with this, entity or spiritual being, however you define Jesus. And I like to remind people that Jesus was the type of character that had a good time. In fact, Jesus' first miracle involved getting an entire party drunk. Now, when you go to a church, they like to turn this as a miracle of water to wine and yada, yada, yada. But I've been to some parties, and if somebody showed up towards the end of the night with an entire batch full of fresh wine, I can assure you that by that point of the party, most people are pretty sloshed. Now, what you'll see here is that Jesus didn't come into the party with a condemnation or a judgment. Rather, he said, hey, y'all are having a good time. Let me bring you the best wine. And I think there's a big lesson there that we can learn from Jesus, is that Jesus got the party drunk. And if that doesn't tell you anything about his character, there's something else I think that might. And we have to go back to the story of Jesus and the woman caught in adultery. Now let's just call a spade a spade. People found a woman, and they also found a man, and I don't know why we don't talk about the man here, but they found two people who were in an act of adultery. Basically, they were violating the bounds of their marriage. So what did the crowd do? Well, all the men took the woman, and they brought her to the center of town to be stoned. Again, I still can't figure out where the man went. He was probably in the crowd, but let's just bookmark that for a later time. So what happens is this woman, and she is about to be stoned to the death by a crowd of men who have stones in their hand. And what does Jesus do? He intervenes. He goes up to the crowd, he draws something in the sand. To this day, people don't know what exactly it is that he drew. But then he looked at everyone and he said something very simple. He said, any of you without any fault, throw the first stone. And what he did there was he made everyone in the crowd with a stone in their hand think about their own life. And what he did that was powerful is that he flipped the stone of judgment, if you will, and he turned it into a position of reflection for the people who were casting the judgment. Now, Jesus had one phrase that I think is very applicable here, and he would always say, "What's it to you?" And in this case, he addressed an entire crowd full of people hell-bent on killing someone and said, "What's it to you? Anyone here who's perfect, go ahead and throw the first rock." But then if you think about it this way, there was something interesting that Jesus did, is that Jesus took a lot of 5D, fifth dimensional concepts, things like everlasting love, for example, and he brought them to us down here in the 3D state where we don't understand concepts like eternal love or forgiveness or all these other things, because down here we just get a lot of pain. Now, the words that he used when he says, "What's it to you?" are very powerful because it can do two things. Number one, it can stop somebody who's in a position of judgment. In this case, the people had rocks in their hands, and when Jesus said, "What's it to you?" he was asking them, "What's your problem?" But now for the person throwing the rock, if they were to take those same words and ask the person that they're casting judgment on, "What's it to you?" from a position of curiosity instead of judgment, all of a sudden now that changes the circumstance a lot. It makes them curious about the person that they were about to cast judgment on instead of cast condemnation. And I think that one of the biggest problems that people have with the Christian church, myself included, is that it's been known for being judgmental. Now this is why I think there's this huge divide within Christianity and Christian values versus what Jesus actually talked about, because Jesus never judged anybody. And if it comes picking between a congregation that's known for being really shitty to a lot of other people versus saying, "Hey, I'm going to follow the guy over here who got the party drunk and didn't cast stones of judgment and, loved people that other people hated," that's the person that I'm going to follow. Now, words have a lot of power. And going back to this shirt, when I showed my mom this shirt, I said, "Mom," I said, "I don't just want to be a good dad. I want to be a great dad. And I don't just want Atlas to think that, hey, dad is pretty cool. Secretly, I want dad to think, hey, my dad is a badass." And I think that every dad out there secretly wants to be a badass on the inside. I do. Let's talk about words, though. There's a disconnect with many churches now. And I've seen this personally, where you can stand on stage and say things with conviction that have absolutely no meaning other than the intonation and inflection of your voice, and you can make a statement. And you can cause emotional rapture in people without saying anything truthful. And I think that's the problem. People go to these congregations, they see someone spitting on stage and getting worked up into a religious tantrum, but they're actually really not saying anything necessarily. And this is what I asked my mom. I said, "I want you to think about your church." And a lot of times the pastor might be up there on stage saying, "Jesus loves every sinner in here." But I said, what would happen if that pastor said, "Jesus loves every slut in here. Jesus loves every asshole in here. Jesus loves every bitch and motherfucker and faggot and idiot and deadbeat dad," and you name the name. What if they said that instead of "Jesus loves the sinners"? What would the impact be? The impact would be that there would be a lot of people in the audience who lift their heads up and they say, "Yeah, that's me," because somebody else has called it a name that's different than their actual name. That's when you would have an impact with somebody. And that's exactly the message that Jesus had. He said, "I love every failure here. I love every idiot here. I love every faggot here." Because if there's somebody that's called you that name, that is not your identity, and you have grown up for too long learning that that is your actual name instead of who it is that I call you, and I do not have a stone of judgment for you. And that is the power of a word. And if pastors actually talked in words that people heard outside of the church instead of this gobbledygook, whitewashed messages, I think that their messages might actually have a shred of impact. But instead, we're keeping it really simple. We're keeping it really nice. And the reality is that things aren't nice out there. There are a lot of motherfuckers out here. There are a lot of bitches out here. There are a lot of people who have taken these names as their own because they truly don't know who they are. And they don't know that there is something out there that loves them unconditionally, far more than any of the other criticisms or comments or stones that others down here have thrown at them. And so today, that's my takeaway, is that there's a lot of power in words. There's a lot of power in a message. And there's a lot of power in knowing what your actual name is. Now I'll close with this if there's a closing. Earlier this week I was using Photoshop to do some drawing. And there's a tool in Photoshop where you can change the perspective of the canvas as if you were drawing a vanishing point, for example. And I noticed that when you took the perspective and you made the perspective look up, that it created a symbol of a cross. Now, the cross has been used in as many symbols for a lot of horrible, awful things. One of Constantine's first things that he proclaimed was that he saw a vision of a cross in the clouds, and thus, in this name, conquer. So it gave it a really bad rap. But demystifying this and taking away every ounce of religion, if we simply look at that symbol as the idea of looking up, of taking your perspective and looking up, it changes the outcome of your life because it changes where you're looking, and that will change where you're headed. So I wish that there was a pastor that would talk like this. I wish there was a pastor that from the stage could tell everybody that he loves them for the words that they've been called, or that they would tell the stories of how badass Jesus was. But instead, we have what we have. And it's like going to a restaurant and getting a lot of food, but not a lot of nutrition because nobody can hear it. That's all I've got for you today. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday, and make it a great weekend.